In the meantime, a remarkable writer and journalist joins us right now, Gerry Baker, Wall Street Journal editor-at-large. A very intriguing column just out today he wrote on the campaign. I do want to touch on that, Gerry, with you, but on the so-called black swan developments that occur out of nowhere, this one has been probably the most telegraphed black swan development, but it's still out there. Oil prices still very low, but up for 5 straight days. So the market might be hinting of something or fearing something, but it's not going nuts about it. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think there's, just a high level of uncertainty. I think probably what's underpinning the fact, as you say very rightly, Neil, that the market hasn't gone crazy and we haven't seen, well, there are 2 things I think that are preventing that. One is wider concerns about an economic slowdown. We had a lot of that obviously last week with the relatively poor jobs numbers at the beginning of the month here in the US. If there is going to be a global slowdown, as it looks like there probably is, then that would obviously depress oil prices. So that's one factor I think that's probably keeping oil prices from going sharply higher in these times of tension. The other factor is, I think there probably is, and this might be wrong, but there probably is still a pretty broad expectation that whatever Iran decides to do, whatever happens next in the Middle East, there isn't going to be an all-out war, because it's not really in anybody's interest to have an all-out war. It's certainly not in Iran's interest. If Iran were to get into a real, genuine shooting war with the United States and Israel, or Israel, it's not going to come out very well from that. At the same time, Israel doesn't actually want to get into a full-scale war with Iran. It's been able to prosecute its campaign against Hamas. It has, as you've heard there from the Middle East directly, the concerns about Hezbollah, but it doesn't actually really want an all-out war because it's being able to achieve many of its goals short of that. So I think probably what's keeping a kind of a ceiling on that oil price at the moment is, again, both the sense that the economy may be weakening, but also that whatever happens is probably going to be limited and measured again, as it was back in April, you remember, when Iran struck back at Israel back then.
A very good point. And to your point, OPEC today has just lowered its global demand forecast by about 135,000 barrels a day. So that's OPEC, the oil giant, saying the demand globally is just not what we had hoped it would be. So that is the outside, force, I think, keeping, as you said, a kind of a lid on oil prices thus far. If I could switch gears right now, the whole Middle East issue has become a hot political issue, and how, Kamala Harris has juggled this battle between, keeping those in favor of the Palestinians or zinging the Israelis against Jewish voters, a safe democratic bloc. And so far she is kind of balance that well. So she's still benefiting from this honeymoon glow the last 3 weeks. She's become a presidential candidate. You go into that in some detail, but before I get into your column, I did want to get your sense of how she has managed to pull that off.
Well, she's had a lot of help from the media, Neil. I mean, I don't think we've ever seen, we've all got used to the idea that the media will treat any Democratic candidate for president, especially in these circumstances, with something approaching adulation and on bended knee. And that's kind of what we've had so far, without her really being pressed, she's changed position, as many people on your show and others have commented, Neil, in the last couple of weeks, on pretty well everything. I mean, every sort of very liberal, progressive position she's ever had, she's been allowed to get away with just issuing a statement and saying, "Oh, I don't believe that anymore," and apparently nobody seems to mind. So she's had a lot of help from the media. Look, there is, I think, especially on the Middle East, I think, and this is going to be a big challenge for Harris and indeed for President Trump should he get reelected. She benefits a little bit, as she does in all of these things, from not being Joe Biden, right? There's no question that a month ago the Democrats were in a terrible state. It was kind of like a death march for Joe. Sorry to put it in those terms, of getting behind Joe Biden. They didn't really think he was going to make it through a second term, and in the unlikely event that he got there, because they thought he was going to lose the election. So they've been reinvigorated by simply just getting rid of Joe Biden and frankly putting anybody there in his place. And on this issue, particularly of Israel-Palestine, Biden was getting the kind of genocide Joe tag from the extreme left of the Democratic Party. It's going to be interesting because Harris, if anything, is widely believed to be even more sympathetic to the Palestinians than Joe Biden was. But so far, those people seem to be keeping their The left seems to be keeping their criticism, kind of muted of Harris at the moment. We'll see what happens at the convention. There is just such a desire on the Democratic side to be united, to come together to defeat Donald Trump, that they may just give her a pass on this. But her past statements on Palestine, the position that she's taken throughout her career pretty well whenever she's talked about this topic, does suggest that, if those people that she's going to be much closer to those people in her party who want the Democrats, want the U.S. to be much more explicitly pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel, critical of Israel at least, and so they're probably going to get what they want. So it's another reason why I think they may actually remain quiet.
Well, she is a blank slate, as hard as it is to believe to a lot of people. You and I cover this all the time. You intimate that in your column. So she can get away with doing that for the time being. But it's Donald Trump who seems to, at least to your liking, be hurting himself. You write that Mr. Trump's performances as he trapezes around the country are reinforcing the illusion, instead of telling them consistently and repeatedly what they are actually getting if they vote Democrat. You go on to write, he is merely reminding them what they will get again if they vote Republican. In other words, with his unusual political skills, you're saying he's botching it. That's it, right?
Yeah, I am. I do think so, Neil. Look, I think what you have is the Democrats are so far, again, with the aid of the media, doing a very good job of presenting Kamala Harris as something new. There's no question, I think, whatever we think of Trump or Biden, there's a hunger in this country for something other than an 80-year-old president who can take the country forward. So the Democrats are absolutely focusing on all of that. It's new, it's different, she's younger. So there is something kind of, if you're fed up with American politics right now, whether it's either side of the political aisle, you think, well, actually, maybe, I do want something new. And you know what? She represents something new. Trump is doing everything, unfortunately, to remind people, it has in the last few weeks anyway, of what they've had for the last 10 years with Donald Trump. And, absolutely, and we've talked about this too before, his record in office, his record of policy was actually relatively successful. But the way he talks about people, the way he says some of the stuff he said, his press conference last week, is frankly, I think just reminds people of all the things they don't like about Donald Trump, some of the crazy things he says, a lot of the falsehoods he says. I mean, as I say in my column today, I went through the transcript of that press conference very closely last week, and almost half of his remarks fell into the category of either false, frankly, rather stupid, or actually borderline insane. And that's, people are tired of that. I think if Trump, it's wishful thinking on a grand scale to think that Trump can focus on Kamala Harris's weaknesses and the Democratic Party's many weaknesses.
He can't, Gerry. He's incapable of doing it. He's not capable of doing it. I don't know why, because as you said, he is a brilliant politician, but by going after and taking apart Brian Kemp, a very popular governor in Georgia, these internal squabbles continue, the name calling and all of that. And then some of these comments out of nowhere that the crowds January 6th were significantly bigger than Martin Luther King had, speaking to the country from the Capitol. I don't know where to begin with that. But even people who are not following this minute by minute, come back to me and say, Neil, did he really say that? And I don't know where that gets him.
I agree, Neil. I totally agree. As you know, all the stuff at the weekend about Kamala Harris's rallies being created by artificial intelligence, and the crowds are not really there. Look, this is Trump, right? And one of the points I try to make in the column is there's this argument that he's been wrong-footed by the Democrat switch, that he was prepared for a campaign against Biden and he's now facing something different. There's some truth to that, but the reality is this: what we're talking about, Neil, these crazy things, these attacks on fellow Republicans, these crazy ideas that he's conspiracy theories that he's propagating. This is Donald Trump. This is what he's done for the last 10 years. Now, again, as I argue, now it worked. It seemed to work in 2016. But in 2016, he was up against a very familiar, long-standing political figure who was one of the most disliked people in the country in the face of Hillary, in the shape of Hillary Clinton. He's up against now someone who's relatively new. Most people, frankly, let's be honest, didn't really know and paid much attention to Kamala Harris in the last few years, who's being enabled by the press to completely reinvent herself to be something different. And Trump just looks kind of like yesterday's news to a lot of people. So those critical small number of voters who are going to vote who are going to swing this election, if they want something new and something different, they're not going to be voting for Donald Trump.
All right. I will say this about AI. Did you know that it can add 20 or 30 pounds on TV? Did you? I guess you didn't know that, but I'm running with that one.
I'm assuming that's. I've always tried to sort of convince myself that that's the explanation, Neil. But I fear that things like dietary intake and lack of exercise might also be more important even than AI. But you never know.
No, you never know. It wouldn't apply to you, young man. I think I was talking about myself. But always good catching up with you. Gerry Baker on that. I do urge you to go online and be looking at this column because it puts in perspective where this race stands. Things really have changed.